August 23, 1944. The late afternoon sun filtered through the grimy windows of a converted warehouse in Camp Blanding, Florida, where the humid air carried the mingled scents of pine resin from the surrounding forests and the institutional disinfectant that permeated every corner of the prisoner of war facility. Inside the concrete-walled recreation hall, 87 German and Japanese women sat in rigid silence on wooden benches, their eyes fixed upon an unfamiliar device that American guards had wheeled into position at the front of the room, a large radio console with fabric-covered speakers and glowing vacuum tubes that hummed softly in the oppressive heat. These women, Wehrmacht auxiliaries, Luftwaffe communication specialists, and Japanese civilian administrators captured during the final phases of Pacific operations, had been transported across oceans to face what they believed would be systematic brutalization at the hands of their captors. Instead, they encountered something their military indoctrination had taught them was impossible: an enemy that sought to demonstrate the power of democratic ideals through the simple act of sharing music, the sound that would haunt their memories and reshape their understanding of American values. Began as a gentle crackle of static electricity through the radio speakers, followed by the warm, melodic strains of Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade, flowing through the humid air like liquid gold. Clean melodies, sophisticated harmonies, and the gentle swing rhythm of American jazz filled a space where these captive women had expected harsh commands, propaganda broadcasts, or the silence of neglect. For prisoners who had spent months listening to the mechanical drone of military communications, the desperate static of failing radio equipment, and the harsh cadences of wartime orders, this abundance of musical beauty represented a cognitive challenge that would force them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about their captors and the nature of the conflict that had brought them to this moment of unexpected grace. The historical significance of this musical encounter extended far beyond the simple provision of entertainment to enemy prisoners. By August 1944, the American approach to prisoner of war treatment had evolved into a sophisticated demonstration of democratic values that reflected broader national characteristics and strategic thinking about post-war reconstruction. The female prisoners held at various facilities across the American mainland represented a unique category of captive, professional women whose skills and perspectives would be crucial for rebuilding their devastated homelands and whose treatment would serve as evidence of American commitment to humanitarian principles that transcended the immediate demands of military victory. American military doctrine, informed by both practical considerations and ethical principles derived from democratic governance, mandated that enemy prisoners receive treatment that reflected American values while simultaneously demonstrating the cultural richness and intellectual sophistication that totalitarian propaganda claimed democratic societies could never achieve. The development of American cultural policies for prisoner of war facilities during World War II had been shaped by democratic institutions that recognized the transformative power of music, literature, and artistic expression in promoting understanding between former enemies. Military planners understood that the treatment of enemy prisoners would serve as evidence of American character and would influence both domestic opinion and international perceptions of American war aims. The systematic provision of cultural activities, educational opportunities, and artistic experiences to enemy captives reflected institutional commitments that extended beyond immediate military necessity to encompass broader questions about the kind of society America intended to build in the post-war world and the values that would guide the reconstruction of defeated nations. For the German and Japanese women awaiting this unexpected musical experience, expectations had been shaped by military propaganda that described American forces as culturally barbarous Philistines who would subject captured personnel to degrading entertainment designed to break their spirits and humiliate their national pride. They had been instructed that American popular culture represented the worst aspects of democratic decadence: crude, materialistic, and intellectually empty expressions of a society that valued profit over beauty and individual gratification over collective purpose. Many had witnessed or heard accounts of the harsh treatment accorded to captured American personnel by Axis forces and assumed that similar or worse cultural humiliation awaited them in American hands. Their final months of service had been marked by increasing desperation as communication systems failed, cultural activities ceased, and the intellectual life that had sustained them through years of conflict gradually disappeared under the pressure of military collapse. The first indication that their expectations might prove incorrect had come during the initial processing procedures, when American personnel addressed them through interpreters not with contempt for their cultural background, but with curiosity about their professional experiences and intellectual interests. Their personal possessions, though subject to security screening, were handled with respect rather than confiscated as symbols of enemy ideology. Educational examinations were conducted with attention to their academic achievements and professional qualifications rather than dismissed as products of totalitarian indoctrination. Most surprising of all, they were informed that their cultural heritage would be respected, and that opportunities would be provided for intellectual engagement that many had never experienced even in their home countries. The radio console itself represented technological capabilities and resource allocation that seemed almost fantastical to women who had spent months in installations where communication equipment was improvised from salvaged components, and entertainment was a luxury reserved for senior officers during brief moments of respite from combat operations. The quality of the electronic components, the clarity of reception, and the sophisticated engineering that delivered consistent, high-fidelity sound reproduction reflected industrial capabilities and logistical sophistication that contrasted sharply with the declining conditions they had experienced in Axis military installations during the final months of the war. The very presence of such equipment in a prisoner facility demonstrated priorities that seemed to value human dignity and cultural enrichment over the mere maintenance of security and basic survival. The administrative procedures surrounding this musical presentation revealed systematic American attention to cultural sensitivity and intellectual respect that challenged Axis assumptions about democratic weakness and individualistic selfishness. Schedules were established to accommodate different language groups and cultural preferences. Musical selections were chosen to represent the diversity and sophistication of American artistic achievement rather than to promote crude propaganda or ideological indoctrination. Personnel were assigned to explain historical and cultural contexts of the music being presented, demonstrating educational approaches that emphasized understanding rather than mere entertainment. Most remarkably, the entire program was conducted with efficiency and organization that contradicted enemy propaganda about American military incompetence and administrative chaos. What followed defied every prediction Axis military doctrine had made about American character and democratic society. The women were not subjected to crude popular entertainment designed to demoralize their spirits, or vulgar displays intended to demonstrate American cultural superiority. Instead, they experienced a carefully curated musical program that revealed the depth, sophistication, and emotional richness of American artistic achievement. Jazz compositions that demonstrated harmonic complexity rivaling European classical traditions, folk songs that expressed genuine cultural heritage and historical continuity, and orchestral arrangements that showcased technical excellence and artistic vision that many had been taught were impossible in democratic societies focused on material rather than spiritual achievement. The symbolic power of American music became apparent as German and Japanese women experienced compositions that challenged every assumption they held about democratic culture and artistic capability. The sophisticated harmonies of Duke Ellington's orchestrations revealed musical complexity that contradicted propaganda claims about American cultural mediocrity. The emotional depth of Billie Holiday's vocal interpretations demonstrated artistic sensitivity that challenged stereotypes about democratic superficiality. The technical excellence of Benny Goodman's clarinet performances showed individual virtuosity, achieved within collective musical frameworks that illustrated democratic principles without sacrificing artistic integrity. For women who had been taught that American culture consisted entirely of crude commercial entertainment and materialistic expressions devoid of spiritual content, this exposure to genuine artistic achievement created profound cognitive dissonance that would reshape their understanding of democratic values and capabilities. The contrast with their recent experience of Axis cultural policies proved overwhelming and transformative. In their final months of service, they had witnessed the systematic subordination of artistic expression to ideological requirements, as military priorities consumed resources that might have been devoted to cultural activities. Music had become a tool of propaganda rather than an expression of human creativity and emotional truth. Educational opportunities had been restricted to subjects deemed militarily useful rather than intellectually enriching. Personal artistic interests had been discouraged as evidence of individualistic selfishness that undermined collective dedication to military victory. The abundance of musical variety and artistic excellence available in American Prisoner facilities revealed values and priorities that many had never encountered in practice. The respect accorded to their cultural backgrounds manifested in unexpected ways throughout this musical presentation. American personnel acknowledged the musical traditions of German classical composition and Japanese artistic heritage, demonstrating cultural awareness that contradicted stereotypes about American ignorance and insensitivity. Opportunities were provided for prisoners to share their own musical knowledge and cultural perspectives, creating exchanges that transcended national boundaries and revealed common human experiences of beauty, creativity, and emotional expression. Most significantly, they were encouraged to maintain their cultural identities while simultaneously being exposed to American artistic achievements, reflecting democratic principles about diversity and tolerance that many had never experienced under totalitarian systems that demanded cultural uniformity. The psychological impact of this respectful cultural treatment proved profound and lasting. Women who had entered American captivity expecting cultural humiliation and artistic deprivation found themselves exposed to musical experiences that were more diverse, sophisticated, and emotionally rich than anything they had encountered in their home countries. The cognitive dissonance between Axis propaganda and American reality created fundamental questions about everything they had been taught regarding democratic values, American character, and the nature of the cultural conflict in which they had participated. Many began to question not just their assumptions about their captors but their understanding of the war itself and the ideological systems they had served, the daily routine established for cultural activities in the prisoner facility further reinforced American commitment to intellectual and artistic engagement that exceeded international law requirements. Musical programs were supplemented by access to literature, educational lectures, and artistic materials that maintained intellectual stimulation during captivity. Recreational opportunities included participation in musical ensembles, creative writing workshops, and cultural discussions that prevented the psychological deterioration that could result from prolonged confinement and uncertainty about the future. Most importantly, these activities were presented not as rewards for good behavior but as recognition of their fundamental human dignity and intellectual capacity regardless of their enemy status. The interaction between prisoners and their American cultural instructors revealed the transformative power of artistic communication that transcended national boundaries and ideological differences. American personnel, many of whom had professional backgrounds in music education and cultural arts, maintained respectful curiosity about prisoner experiences and perspectives rather than dismissive contempt for enemy cultural achievements. These interactions, marked by mutual respect for artistic excellence and shared appreciation for musical beauty, created opportunities for understanding that challenged assumptions on both sides about national character and cultural values. The musical education provided to prisoners demonstrated American commitment to intellectual development that recognized no boundaries of nationality or political allegiance. When prisoners expressed interest in learning about American musical history and compositional techniques, they received instruction that met established educational standards rather than simplified propaganda presentations. Access to musical instruments, sheet music, and practice facilities was provided based on interest and ability, rather than security considerations or resource limitations. This approach to cultural education reflected democratic values about intellectual freedom and personal development that many had never experienced under systems that subordinated individual interests to collective ideological requirements. The abundance of musical resources available to American prisoner facilities represented more than material prosperity. It reflected systematic priorities that valued cultural enrichment and intellectual stimulation even for enemy captives. Record collections included comprehensive representations of American musical achievement across multiple genres and historical periods. Audio equipment was maintained to professional standards rather than improvised from available materials. Cultural instructors were trained to provide education that met established academic standards regardless of the audience's nationality or military affiliation. The systematic attention to cultural quality revealed institutional values that prioritized human dignity and intellectual growth over mere custodial efficiency. The educational opportunities available to prisoners reflected American commitment to intellectual freedom and cultural development that extended even to enemy captives. Access to educational materials about American history, democratic institutions, and cultural achievements demonstrated values that emphasized individual growth and intellectual engagement. Many prisoners found these opportunities more extensive and intellectually stimulating than what they had experienced in their home countries, revealing contrasts between democratic and totalitarian approaches to education and cultural development. The willingness to share knowledge and cultural resources with former enemies illustrated democratic principles that valued human potential, regardless of national origin or political background. The religious and cultural tolerance demonstrated toward prisoners showed American commitment to constitutional principles that remained operative even under wartime conditions and toward enemy captives. Prisoners were permitted to maintain their religious practices, observe traditional cultural ceremonies, and express spiritual beliefs without interference or persecution. This tolerance, extending even to enemy prisoners during active military conflict, illustrated democratic principles that many had never encountered in practice and challenged their assumptions about American society and religious freedom. As the war approached its end, prisoners in American facilities faced the prospect of repatriation with complex emotions that reflected their transformed understanding of American character and democratic values. Their cultural experiences had provided exposure to artistic achievement and intellectual freedom that challenged fundamental assumptions about democratic societies and their capacity for cultural excellence. Many had developed appreciation for American artistic traditions and democratic values that would influence their post-war attitudes and activities in their reconstructed homelands. The final cultural presentations before repatriation provided opportunities for American personnel to document the impact of respectful treatment on enemy captives and to gather information about prisoner responses that could inform post-war cultural exchange programs. Many prisoners expressed gratitude for their cultural experiences and indicated willingness to support democratic reforms and cultural exchanges in their home countries. The relationships formed through shared musical experiences had created foundations for future cooperation that would contribute to successful democratization and cultural understanding between former enemies. The American music that had symbolized democratic values and cultural achievement throughout their captivity would remain a powerful symbol for German and Japanese women as they returned to devastated homelands where cultural institutions had been destroyed and artistic resources had become precious rarities. Their memories of American musical abundance, artistic excellence, and systematic attention to cultural Education would provide models for post-war reconstruction and inspiration for democratic reforms that could create similar institutions and values in their home societies. The transformation experienced by female prisoners through exposure to American cultural achievement represented more than individual change. It demonstrated the power of democratic values and artistic expression to transcend national boundaries and ideological conflicts, the respect accorded to enemy captives, the abundance of cultural resources, and the systematic attention to intellectual dignity had created experiences that challenged assumptions, promoted understanding, and contributed to post-war reconciliation between former enemies through the universal language of musical beauty and artistic excellence. In the quiet moments before repatriation, as German and Japanese women packed their few possessions and prepared to return to an uncertain future in defeated and occupied homelands, many reflected on the experiences that had transformed their understanding of American character and democratic values. The sound of American music flowing from those radio speakers had become a symbol of cultural richness, intellectual freedom, and humanitarian concern that would influence their post-war lives and their understanding of what democratic society could achieve when guided by principles that valued human dignity and artistic expression above political considerations and military necessity. The legacy of their cultural treatment would extend far beyond their individual experiences to influence post-war development of democratic institutions, promotion of cultural exchange between former enemies, and establishment of educational relationships that would define international cultural cooperation for generations. Their testimony about American cultural achievement and democratic values would contribute to broader understanding of democratic principles and help establish foundations for the successful cultural reconstruction that would transform defeated nations from enemies into democratic allies through the transformative power of shared artistic experience and mutual cultural respect. The radio, simple, technological, abundant in American facilities, had revealed itself as a symbol of values that transcended military necessity and political conflict. It represented not just entertainment, but institutional priorities that valued cultural enrichment, intellectual freedom that could flourish even in prisoner facilities, and humanitarian principles that recognized universal human needs for beauty, creativity, and artistic expression regardless of nationality or political affiliation. For German and Japanese women who had experienced this cultural abundance and respect during their captivity, the radio would forever symbolize the transformative power of democratic values and the possibility for understanding even between the most bitter of enemies through the universal language of music and artistic achievement. The tears that flowed during those first musical presentations had proved more powerful than the rhetoric of war, more transformative than military victory, and more lasting than the animosities that had divided nations across the world. They had revealed the truth that artistic expression knows no boundaries, that cultural excellence possesses universal appeal, and that humanitarian treatment possesses the power to transform understanding and create foundations for lasting peace between former enemies. The American music, symbol of democratic achievement and cultural values, had become an instrument of reconciliation that would influence the post-war world in ways that battlefield victories alone could never achieve. The final irony was not lost on those who witnessed this transformation. Women who had entered American captivity as defeated enemies had discovered in their cultural treatment a vision of democratic society and artistic achievement that would guide their post-war activities and contribute to the successful democratization of their homelands. The respect they had received as enemy prisoners would inspire them to support democratic reforms that could extend similar cultural opportunities and intellectual freedom to all members of their societies, creating ripple effects that would influence cultural development and international understanding for generations to come. The emotional response of these women to American musical achievement represented more than personal transformation. It illustrated the fundamental truth that human beings share common responses to beauty, creativity, and artistic excellence that transcend political boundaries and ideological differences. Their tears revealed universal human needs for cultural enrichment and intellectual stimulation that democratic societies could fulfill more completely than totalitarian systems that subordinated individual expression to collective ideology. The music had demonstrated that democratic values and cultural freedom could produce artistic achievements that touched the deepest human emotions and created bonds of understanding that might serve as foundations for lasting peace. The abundance of American cultural resources available to enemy prisoners during wartime reflected broader democratic principles about human dignity and intellectual potential that distinguished free societies from authoritarian regimes. The willingness to share the finest achievements of American culture with former enemies demonstrated confidence in democratic values and belief in the transformative power of artistic excellence that could promote understanding and reconciliation between nations. This cultural generosity, extended even during active military conflict, revealed institutional maturity and humanitarian vision that would become hallmarks of American leadership in the post-war reconstruction of international cultural relationships. The systematic nature of cultural programming provided to prisoners reflected institutional commitments that transcended individual personalities or local circumstances. The abundance of musical resources, the quality of cultural instruction, and the respectful treatment of prisoner cultural interests was maintained across different facilities and different time periods, demonstrating that cultural respect reflected policy decisions and institutional values, rather than exceptional circumstances or individual initiative. This consistency revealed democratic institutional capacity for maintaining humanitarian standards and cultural sophistication, even under the pressures of global military conflict. The educational impact of cultural treatment extended beyond immediate humanitarian concerns to encompass broader questions about post-war reconstruction and international relations. American cultural programming served as evidence of democratic values and institutional capabilities that would influence prisoner attitudes toward democratic reform and cooperation with former enemies. The contrast between propaganda predictions and actual cultural experiences created cognitive challenges that would contribute to fundamental reconsideration of authoritarian ideology and democratic alternatives that might guide post-war political and cultural development. The efficiency with which American facilities provided high-quality cultural programming, diverse musical resources, and respectful cultural instruction demonstrated logistical capabilities and organizational sophistication that impressed even experienced enemy personnel. The systematic nature of cultural care, maintained despite wartime resource pressures and security concerns, revealed institutional priorities and administrative competence that contradicted enemy assumptions about democratic inefficiency and individualistic chaos that supposedly characterized American social organization. The personal dignity accorded to enemy prisoners throughout their cultural experiences reflected systematic American respect for individual worth that transcended national boundaries and political affiliations. They were addressed with courtesy regarding their cultural interests, consulted about their artistic preferences, and treated as individuals deserving of respect rather than as generic enemy captives. This treatment, far from being exceptional, reflected institutional policies that maintained humanitarian standards and cultural sophistication even toward enemy personnel during active military conflict. The cultural opportunities provided to prisoners illustrated American commitment to intellectual development that recognized no boundaries of nationality or political allegiance. When prisoners required cultural education or artistic instruction, they received professional guidance that met established educational standards regardless of their enemy status. Access to musical instruments, educational materials, and cultural activities demonstrated systematic commitment to human welfare that extended beyond minimum legal requirements to encompass genuine concern for intellectual and spiritual well-being during the difficult period of captivity and uncertainty. The recreational and cultural activities available to prisoners reflected American understanding that prolonged confinement could create psychological problems that humanitarian treatment should address through positive cultural engagement. Organized musical programs, access to educational materials, and opportunities for artistic expression demonstrated institutional attention to prisoner welfare that went beyond basic necessities to encompass broader human needs for intellectual stimulation and cultural continuity that could maintain psychological health during captivity. The cultural freedom accorded to prisoners demonstrated American commitment to constitutional principles that remained operative even under wartime conditions and toward enemy captives. Prisoners were permitted to maintain their cultural traditions, express their artistic preferences, and engage with their cultural heritage without interference. This tolerance illustrated democratic principles that many had never experienced and challenged their assumptions about American society and cultural freedom that could flourish even in military facilities during wartime. The transformation in prisoner understanding of American cultural achievement occurred gradually, but fundamentally as they witnessed daily demonstrations of artistic excellence, intellectual sophistication, and cultural generosity that contradicted everything enemy propaganda had taught them about democratic societies. The abundance of musical resources, the quality of cultural instruction, the respect for artistic achievement, and the systematic attention to cultural dignity combined to create experiences that challenged basic assumptions about American character and democratic capabilities that might guide post-war reconstruction and international cultural cooperation. The American music that flowed from those radio speakers became for many prisoners a symbol of cultural richness, intellectual freedom, and humanitarian values they had discovered in American captivity. The contrast with their memories of restricted cultural expression, ideologically controlled artistic production, and institutional indifference to individual, cultural needs in their home countries created lasting impressions that would influence their post-war understanding of democratic values and American character that might contribute to international cultural understanding and cooperation. In the end, the sound of American music had proved more powerful than the sounds of war, more transformative than military conquest, and more lasting than the hatreds that had divided nations across the globe. It had revealed the truth that cultural excellence knows no boundaries, that artistic achievement possesses universal appeal, and that humanitarian treatment possesses the power to transform understanding and create foundations for lasting peace between former enemies. The radio, symbol of American abundance and democratic values, had become an instrument of reconciliation that would influence the post-war world in ways that military victories alone could never accomplish, demonstrating that the highest achievements of human civilization lie not in the capacity to destroy, but in the ability to create beauty, share knowledge, and extend dignity even to those who had been enemies in the tragic conflicts that had torn the world apart.